Namaste and greetings to all. I am really happy to be here at the inaugural function of the online international conference on folk art and folklore organized by various organizations, but major leading role being that of Lokayan, supported by the Sangeet Natak Academy and some government organizations as well. Let me congratulate at the outset Monica Thakkarji, who is the moving force behind this entire conference, and I'm sure this conference, this kind of brainstorming will lead to some very concrete policy perspectives about which all of us will have to work. Today, talking about folklore, folk culture, folk traditions becomes extremely critical because in a globalized world, all folk cultures in the entire world, whether in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, and of course in India, have a lurking fear of being threatened. Threatened by what? Threatened by the specter of the flattening of the world as predicted by Thomas Friedman. Because in a globalized world, as we experience, that powerful cultures, and especially modern cultures that are basically spreading their influence on the basis of technology, which is now an essential part of our day-to-day life, are trying to establish their dominance, and in the process, all small cultures, or I would say the traditional cultures, feel threatened, and rightly so. So what do we do and how do we face this challenge so that the very existence of folk traditions, folk cultures, folklore, everything remains intact? I would suggest that there are at least three things which we require to think about. Firstly, documentation. The entire gamut of features of folklore, folk culture requires to be properly documented so that it is preserved and the present generation is able to hand it over to the next generation as a treasure of our culture. This is very, very required because the younger generation might not have experienced all the nuances and all the beauties of our folk music, folk stories for that matter, folk tales as what we call, folk literature, and even all kinds of folk traditions, including the way we have been celebrating our festivals traditionally. So all this requires to be properly documented and handed over to the next generation, maybe digitally as well, because that is the new language as the world understands documentation. Secondly, what is required is that for the sustenance of those folk artists who are into instrumental music, who are into our traditions of storytelling for that matter, they also require to be supported with all kinds of modern technological assistance and at the same time financial support and other things as well, because they for sure are experiencing some kind of an existential crisis. I'll give you an example. In Maharashtra's Meerut or in Varanasi or in Kolkata, there are certain communities that are into the manufacturing of string musical instruments, or what is called also as acoustic musical instruments, like let's say Tanpura or Dilbahar and so on and so forth. Now all these instrument makers who are basically into handicrafts required to be supported, required to be given every kind of assistance. Otherwise, these people will stop working in this traditional art and switch over to certain new things which are perhaps more alluring, more assuring of income, and therefore we need to support them. Otherwise, these traditional instrument makers will switch over to certain other things and we will not have the tradition of traditional music instrument manufacturing almost finished. And this we should not be allowing to happen, and therefore it is the responsibility not only of the government but the entire society to extend every possible help, as I said, technological help, financial help, and every other kind of help which they require, including some kind of mentoring and hand-holding. I am happy to share with you that the Indian Council for Cultural Relations has taken a conscious call that we would be supporting these manufacturers who have been exporting their instruments in a huge number in various other countries, basically Europe, and this requires to be, as I said, supported. The third thing, apart from technological and financial support, we also require to provide good number of opportunities, or I would say adequate number of opportunities and respect to the folk artists, because folk artists consider kind of marginalized in today's world of blitzkrieg, where all kinds of showmanship is taking over all niceties of our folk traditions. Unfortunately, people are enamored by big shows, big events, and in this period of eventification, if I may use the term, of every other small thing, folk artists require to be provided opportunities and respect to present their art and make kind of deeper inroads into the modern society, which is required, because only with that they would be able to sustain their art, because art for them, of course, it is a creativity which is within them that is manifested through their art, but of course their lives are also important. They need to be given those kinds of exposures and opportunities and avenues to present their art in multiple ways, and for that also I believe all the members of the creative community, if I may put it that way, of which institutions like Sangeet Natak Academy are principal players, they also need to come forward and ensure. I am not talking about any kind of a quota as such, but folk artists require to be given at least, let's say, 30% of the opportunities that the government might be providing to various art forms. If that happens, I am sure our folk culture will be able to sustain. Number of issues are there, and I believe new ideas and new suggestions will definitely emerge out of this brainstorming. I wish every success to this conference, and once again thank the organizers for having me here. Thank you very much. Bharat Mata Ki Jai.